So good evening, everybody, and you're very welcome to our Junior Cycle Geography webinar. We're delighted to have you join us this evening, where we'll explore some areas that will hopefully help to reduce your workload with effective planning, feedback and assessment. Just by way of introduction, my name is Conor Walker and I work with the Fellman's Post primary publishing team. And I'm joined tonight by Peter Lydon, who most of you already know. Peter has been teaching geography for a fair long time now and has held various roles within the AGTI. And I think given his experience, I'm sure he'll have some nuggets of information tonight that will help you with your planning particularly. The presentation itself is likely to go, I think, for about 25 minutes or thereabouts, and we'll cover areas like how to examine and interpret learning outcomes effectively, then maybe organizing those outcomes into units of learning to make planning easier. Peter then, I think, is going to look at the whole area of feedback and assessment and how that fits into that structure, including classroom-based assessment and exam techniques. So it's all about being smart and time efficient as you can be. Also, during the presentation, Peter will draw us on some of the features that we have in our publication, Real World Geography, that might be relevant to planning and assessment. And at the end, then we'll come back. We'll have a Q&A for a few minutes. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat box, which is across the menu at the top of your screen there as we go along. And we'll get to as many questions at the end that we possibly can. To let you know as well that we're recording this webinar and a link will be sent out to everyone who's attending tonight. And we'll also share the slides from the webinar with everybody registered by tomorrow at some point. So with that, I'm going to disappear for a little while and I'll come back at the Q&A. So I'll hand you over to Peter, who will take us through the webinar. And it's over to you, Peter. Best of luck.
That's great, Conor. Thank you very much indeed. So we'll jump in. I have my title slide up here. So I said I would look at three things. Last year did something different, and I thought this year do something different again. So I'm going to look at planning, going to look at feedback, and I'm going to look at assessment, right? And I thought what it would be maybe a useful thing to do would be to tell you where I was coming from with the approach that we took to this particular package, this particular program, and what it was that I would like to have in the classroom, because my experience, I think, is probably very similar to yours. You know, it's new junior cycle course. There's an awful lot going on. How do you do it? How do you kind of not cut corners, because you don't want to cut corners, but how do you make sure that you're not doing more work than you need to do because we're so busy with everything else? So my starting point was with the 28 learning outcomes, okay? And one of the things that's interesting about the junior cycle is that originally the idea behind the junior cycle was that schools would have their own junior cycle program, both for the entire school, but also then for within each subject, so that a student doing geography down in junior cycle geography down in Galway might do a completely different junior cycle geography to somebody in Dublin and somebody down in Cork and so on, right? But that wasn't really fully practical because there's an exam, and because everybody sits the same exam, that kind of required some kind of agreement on what these learning outcomes require you to do, right? And that's a bit of a tall order. Like, you know, you can't kind of stumble from one exam year to the next, because it'd take you 10 years to kind of figure out what you're meant to be doing. So I thought when we were originally putting this program together, what we needed to do was interpret what these actually required us to do, right? And that was a sort of a mission impossible. So the way it kind of breaks down is we were meant to examine the learning outcomes as teachers. That's what we were meant to do. So we go and read the learning outcomes, and then what we do is we interpret them. So if I flick back to learning outcome 1.1, describe the formation and global distribution of volcanoes, earthquakes, fault mountains in the context of plate tectonics and the structure of the earth. Like, that's a mouthful. But what we're meant to do is interpret exactly what that requires us to teach in the classroom, right? And then once you've done that, we had to organize the learning outcomes into units of learning, and that came from the in-service. It wasn't something that featured heavily when the whole specification was being designed. Um, so you organize that into units of learning. Units of learning are important. Inspectors can ask for them when they come around. You don't need to have them all kind of done, but I'll deal with that shortly. But you do need to have units of learning sort of ready to go. Okay, then you have to teach the units of learning, and when you're teaching the units of learning, invariably they break up into different components. So you've got to teach each of those little components, and that means you've got to prepare for class, and then you kind of have to know what you're going to do when you're delivering that in class, like what is your contribution to that, if you like. And then you need to have student activity, because you could try talking for 40 minutes or an hour, but the kids would probably be writing, so you need to keep them busy at some point and help them reinforce the learning from the activities that you're doing with them. And then ideally we need to give students feedback, because how well do they know that they're doing? And of course we want to catch students who perhaps might be struggling a little bit and find a way to actually help them improve. And then there might be the issue of homework. So you have to give them homework. Some parents expect it, certainly schools expect it to a certain extent. What does that homework look like? And how can you meet the expectations with regard to that? And then you have to assess the student activity and maybe even their homework. So you have to assess what they're actually doing, and give them feedback on that. And then you have to get them ready for exams, and then you have all the CBAs, right? So it's kind of like if I put it down on a slide and just gave you that in one go, you might think it's not an awful lot, but actually it breaks down to an awful lot of little bits and pieces, and it's hugely time consuming. And on top of all that, you have to time it. You've got to be able to fit it into 3 years. And you know originally back in 2008, they were going to rebalance the old junior cert to cut out material. I think we've kind of ended up nearly with more material in the new junior cycle compared to the old junior cert. So how do you plan that? So what we did was we took the sort of assessment guidelines and said, right, okay, we're going to have CBAs. Let's decide what we're going to do with those. So that's just kind of like a contents page of the CBA related material that's in the real world geography program. Okay, and as you can see with that sample there's a couple of sort of CBA warm up exercises that are in the textbook. This is in the chapter on volcanoes, and the questions are all kind of based on the 5WH questions. And it's kind of like, I do this in first year when we're doing volcanoes, and it kind of gradually just gently introduces students to the idea of CBAs, and that sort of takes the sting out of it by the time you get to second year. So that's the CBAs. I'm not going to talk too much about them. In terms of the units of learning, I drew up a spreadsheet, and myself and Tara, what we did was we organized all of the requirements based on what the units of learning kind of required. So there's a program, or as part of the program, there's an Excel file which the reps can give to you, which has all of the units of learning pre-made. Okay, and I think the important thing is with these is not that you sort of put them into your folder in school, into your subject plan in your department, and just kind of content yourself that you have them, but that once a year you might sit down with one or two of those units of learning and say, right, based on our reflection on the way the kids receive that in the classroom, what kind of edits will we make to those units of learning? So it's the key point about the units of learning is the collaborative professional engagement that you have with your colleagues in the department, so that you can enhance the learning experience for students, right? And so we have these 12 units here, and that's just a template. It's fairly straightforward. There's a few different types of templates for units of learning, and I know the JCT kind of adds some tweaks, but actually to a certain extent you can kind of decide what your own unit of learning should look like. There are certain things you have to have, like you have to have the kind of geoliteracy, decide what kind of learning outcomes you're going to have. So what does it look like? This is only part of it now, because I have all these on a big spreadsheet, which I've handed over to Folens. And so this is just unit 1, Third Rock from the Sun. And it's strand 1. And then you can see I've got 3 LOs in there. And then there's the action verbs. So that's important from an exam perspective. There's the number of lessons that I think it roughly takes to teach those, and then the chapters in the book. Now, they just happen to be sequential, but not all of the units have sequential chapters, because the topics are not sequential in the specification, right? In the 3 different strands. But you can see that you have the elements in there. That's really important, because when we're teaching, we're meant to sort of kind of emphasize, either explicitly or within the sort of class material that we're using, we're meant to emphasize the elements, because so geographical skills are part of that, but you'll recognize the patterns, processes, systems in there, and scale. And so that's all laid out. And if I click back, so basically it's all of this learning unit template done across the entire program. So that's your units of learning. That kind of has you set up, right? And then what you want to do is you go into class to teach your material, right? But to teach it, you have to decide when you're going to do that. So what I did, because I actually based this on what we've been doing for years in Wesley, and shout out to my colleagues who would have contributed to this over many years. We keep tweaking this, so it suits us at the moment. It's going to be horses for courses, really. I find that in first year, the students really engage with the things that go boom, right? They like volcanoes and earthquakes and all of that plate tectonic stuff. But I've heard of teachers having great success, say, teaching with settlement as a starting point in first year. But this is all of the learning outcomes split across the 6 terms, basically, or I suppose 9 terms, really, and then across each of the weeks. So the weeks are all numbered, and then within that, then you have the relevant topic that we're teaching, and then there's the chapter number, and then how long it's going to take. So I have that up on my wall in school, so I can see where I am at any particular time, and it's up on Folens Hive. You can download it. That's also goes up on the website, and I also give that to students so they can see exactly where they're at. I know where we're going, and it's not set in stone. Like, there's going to be a bit of variation. It might not necessarily take me 6 classes to do Dublin City. It might take me 5. It depends on the cohort. Some years it might take me 7. But there's a bit of space built into this program to allow for projects and so on. And that's basically my guide for starting. Like, I have that. I know that this week we're just finishing off CBAs, actually, in second year, and I've actually covered that. So I think my next topic there is natural. No, do you know what? It's population. We're going on to next. So I'll go into class now next week, and I'm going to start on population. So I have my yearly program split up into terms, split up into weeks. What happens next? Sorry, that's just a version of that. What I do then is I go into class, and I have all my PowerPoints. Now, I wouldn't be overly reliant on PowerPoints, and I pick and choose what I want. But the entire program is actually in a highly structured set of PowerPoints, and I'll show you what these look like. But because it's all there, I can pick and choose, and I'm not wondering about whether I've forgotten something or left something out. Like, literally the whole kit and caboodle is there. So this is volcanoes. So I start off with that. My learning outcome is just underneath there. But that then on the title page of each chapter, there's this statement about what students will be able to do. And that's actually really important. And in fact, you'll see this with the new Leaving Certificate specification, because they've actually put that into the structure of the strands in the Leaving Cert, where students learn about, and students have to be able to do X, Y, Z. So that wasn't as explicit in the junior cycle specification. So we put it into each chapter. So students know that, for example, with this one, they have to be able to describe and explain how volcanoes are formed. So at the end of this section, they will be able to do that. You can actually take these 5 different sections, just turn them into questions. And that's the kind of thing that might come up on in the junior cycle exam. So more about that. So then the next stage, and that is the keyword connections. Now, these are not just lists of keywords, even though they are that. They're actually designed to connect up different aspects. So the formation is the magma chamber, the vent, the crater, the different structure of a volcano in this particular case. And then there's the different types, so active, dormant, extinct. But then there's the distribution, so that's at plate boundaries. So it's designed to sort of make those keywords just have a little bit more meaning by showing how they're connected. One of the things I would say to parents as a sort of an absolute minimum for junior cycle, you want your child to have strong numeracy, strong literacy, and a good work ethic, right? And if that's all they left junior cycle with, that would be great. Obviously, we want them to have good geography as well. But literacy is really, really, really important. And I emphasize that quite a lot in class, so that students are actually able to read and interpret questions correctly. And then that they have the actual target language to answer questions. So I've had answers from questions that students have done that are really, really nice geography, but if they leave out the key words, if they leave out the target language, they're not really going to accumulate marks when it comes to assessment. So the keywords are really, really important, and I pre-teach those. So there's a bit of debate about whether you emphasize literacy at the end or at the beginning of a topic. I introduce all the words from the get-go, and I use that as a way of finding out what students already know from their own experience. And then there's the content, and that's just one slide from the PowerPoint. So that happens to be off 2.1, okay? And then within each PowerPoint, there's these little markers that kind of prompt students, right, now you go and do that section in your skills book. And so that's the student activity bit, right? That's the teacher activity bit for this particular approach anyway. And that would be the student piece. I think that's the bit that asks them to actually draw the volcano and label it. And I think that came up on one of the exams one year, if I recall correctly. And then at stage points throughout the PowerPoint, there's the quick quizzes, and they're pulled in from the textbook. And there's a set of solutions for all of those. So they're your nice sort of general questions that every student should be able to answer, right? But then on top of that, there's some higher order questions. Now, I wouldn't ask the higher order questions, say, at the end of a lesson. I bring those in at the start. In fact, I bring the quick quiz questions in at the start of a lesson as well, as a sort of retrieval practice to kind of prompt kids to remember what we did the previous day. But I like to stretch them a little bit with these slightly harder questions. And certainly when inspectors come in, they like to see evidence, whether it's whole school or subject, they like to see evidence of higher order questions being asked. So that's built into the PowerPoint. And then at the end of it all, students are asked to assess their progress. And I'll show you what that looks like. Now, that can actually be a very difficult thing for them to do, because while they might know that they've completed a piece of work, they may not know to what extent or how well they've completed it. So, but it's still a useful thing to ask them, how well do you think you know something? And invariably what I find is boys tend to over-assess how well they've done, or tend to overestimate how well they've done, whereas girls tend to underestimate how well they've done. I don't know if you had a similar experience, but it's useful from that point of view, because it helps you to, especially for the girls, to give them more encouragement to go, look, you're doing great with that, just keep going. And for the boys to say, oh, look, you've left that piece of detail out that you need to add in. So that's the PowerPoint. Now, I wouldn't be using that all the time. I pick and choose for topics, because I would also have plenty of classes where we have, scissors and Pritt stick, and we're doing stuff like that, or we have debates and discussions. So, but just that's specifically from the program. And literally, you can walk into class and just go, right, today I'm doing 2.1 and 2.2. and tomorrow I'll do 2.3 and 2.4, and it ticks the boxes, right? The other thing about that is each of those sections align identically with the skills book. So when it comes back to this, if students get stuck on the questions here, they just go back to that section in the textbook and they can complete that activity. So it's pretty straightforward. This is the one of the assessment pages from the end of the skills book, and I don't always do this, you know, because sometimes it just gets a little bit tedious, but it's there for certainly for first years. I like to get them to actually think about how well they're doing. But they've got this traffic light system, and they can tell me whether or not they feel they're doing okay, or that they're getting stuck on something. And then what I can do is, and I'll show an example of this when I'm going through their skills book. I can kind of say, right, okay, look, you've got sort of distinction level stuff for 2.1, you have distinction for the section 2.2, but you have a higher merit on 2.3. You might need to go back and do a bit of work there. And then I'll add a little comment for them, just to give them some feedback. Now, huge amounts of stuff have been written on feedback, but really feedback comes down to two things with a little sort of aside to it. You want to kind of affirm what students are doing that's good, right? So pat on the back stuff, you know, well done, you did a good job there. But also you want to kind of advise them where there might be gaps in their learning. So typically feedback is about helping students identify ways that they can move forward in their learning. And so you want to fill any gaps, you want to correct any errors, and then you might want to identify ways in which, when they're answering specific questions on certain topics, that they answer it in a way that will help them maximize their performance in the exam, because ultimately that's where they're going to end up. Now, none of that is to take away from the joy and the pleasure and the wonder of learning about geography. But actually, if kids don't feel that they're doing well and they don't feel that they're making progress, they very quickly go off a subject. So those two things feed in. The more information they have about how they can improve, and the more support they have in that, the more they'll feel better about the subject, and they're the more likely to learn it. And I'll show you some examples of that. So this is one of the sort of approaches I took when we were designing the skills book is I didn't want another workbook, right? Because quite often, I mean, if you have kids yourself, or you might have that experience of students have a workbook that goes along with the textbook, but they never use it. And I didn't want that to be the case. So I wanted a book that was kind of like they could use it for note taking. They still have a notepad in class, but they would use it for note taking in class, but they would also have activities to reinforce their learning in the classroom. And I didn't want to be taking home piles of copybooks to correct, you know, once a night or once a week. So what we ended up with was a skills book that has exam style questions that help reinforce student learning as they go along, and that was manageable within the way the program was structured. You know, so you would do section, this is 7.3, say, for example. We would teach 7.3 in class, and then the kids would do this activity, and then we will go over it and check it in class. So these little tick marks here, these are the students' tick marks. So what I say to them in class is, right, I want you to do that exercise, right? And when they've done it, I say, okay, when you were filling in those blanks, right, did you tick off each of the words as you went along, right? Now, this student did all bar one, right? So this is their tick marks. And I would say to them, like, you know, if you got it right, you know, go, yes, right, to yourself, right? Yeah, got that right, okay. And this one, same thing here, they put little tick marks. And then I would take in the skills book at the end of a topic, and I would check that they've done their corrections and that they're fine and that there's no gaps. And so this is my check mark here, right? Just catching up on their work. That's a particularly important piece, right? This is another example, okay? And so she's identified the limestone pavement there, so tick mark there, right? And then she's provided this answer, right? And this is actually a nice example of exam technique, and I think I have one that will show you where this works. So the question is to explain how chemical weathering formed this landscape, right? Now, even though she's identified this as limestone landscape, she should really mention it here. So what happens is she goes, acid rain reacts with the vertical joints in the limestone. Okay, now that's okay, but really what she should be saying here is what chemical weathering is. And so a good starting point would be to go, well, this is limestone pavement. It's weathered by chemical weathering. An example of chemical weathering is carbonation. Carbonation is when acid rain forms, when water vapor falls through the atmosphere and mixes with carbon dioxide. The acid rain falls on the limestone and reacts with the vertical joints. Okay, so there was a couple of issues with this, right? And I just wrote give examples because I could pick 3 or 4 things out here, but that would be way too many for her to correct. Okay, the the time to add to this would be say when we're revising, but there's a couple of things that I would point out to her here, right? The reason there's that number of lines is because that's the amount of space that I think it would take a student with average handwriting to be able to answer that question adequately. So I would say to them, you know, you have to fill this space. Now, if she wrote with bigger handwriting, she could fill the space. It's not about filling the space. It's with regular handwriting, that's how much it would take you to provide an adequate answer. So therefore, if you haven't used all of the space, there's bound to be something missing in your answer. And as it turns out here, that there is. Okay, so when I was giving her some feedback on this, I said, well, you know, good work, well done. For 7.4, please try to fill the available space. You could give examples of landscapes, maybe give a location, and then I referred to species. So this is part of 7.4 up here as well. So they were kind of like, it's feedback to help her kind of identify where she could add some detail that would help move her forward. Now that's on the first exposure. A second exposure, you'd expect more. The second exposure would be, say, when it comes to an exam time, and she answers an exam question, and then you hope that would be better, so that she's acted on the feedback. So acting on the feedback is really important. And so in class, when I'm giving verbal feedback in class, I'll pause to allow students to add in some detail, right? So this is another student. So she's correctly said limestone pavement. I haven't actually gotten around to marking this one yet. This is with first years the other day. And she was the same. She goes, chemical weathering formed this landscape when acid in the rain fell. Now that's okay because she said chemical weathering, but it would be nice if she said chemical weathering was carbonation. But in class, I said, okay, well, is the first thing that you said that this is the first thing written? This starts with limestone pavement, or this landscape is limestone pavement, and she didn't have that, but she put the note in because I said to them, put the note in the margin that you would add that in, that you start with that. Okay, and then you can see down here she said this landscape is weathered by chemical weathering. An example of chemical weathering is carbonation, and then she's back up to she's got the chemical weathering here, but she could have just said carbonation occurs when acid rain reacts with limestone. So she's adding in the verbal feedback in class, and it's now a little bit messy, but she has a hardback, and she'll have an activity that will say, I'll give her an activity to basically rewrite that neatly, just to, so she has it in her notes for you know, for when it comes to say a class test or the summer exams, right? So that's what I'm doing. And the thing about doing these corrections is I would do the corrections in class because I don't want to be taking these home for me to correct, but also I want them to correct their own work and to see how they're getting them right. And if they're not getting it right, getting them to write in the corrections. There's no point in me writing in words that they got incorrect, because they'll look at it and not pay any attention to it. So they're the ones who have to act on on the feedback. I think I have another example of that. Yeah, so this is from Rivers. So you can see where the student has put in a couple of lines here. I would have said this in class. It didn't work to do this in the diagram. It's on another diagram in the textbook, where there's a profile of the river and it's divided into upper, middle, and lower. So I said, look, just draw in 2 lines here and label them upper, middle, and lower. So that means that she's now able to connect upper course directly with interlocking spurs and source in the second part of the program, because it's in the textbook, but now it's in her skills book as well. And this one I did correct. I went through that one, but you can see where there's little places where she's adding in little kind of notes to help her. So, 1 point. So this note here is about identifying a point on the river, giving a grid reference for it, as the case may be, and then stating an explanation for why, for example, in this case, this might not be a good place to put housing. The levees are the kind of giveaway here, because so this area floods. So I checked through that, but I sort of fed back to her, great work here. I like the notes that you add as you go along. Well done. Keep going. And it was all kind of distinction stuff. So she knows that's kind of encouragement that, when she's doing work like this in class and she's getting feedback on it, actually, this is her correction here. When she's getting feedback on it, that, if she thinks she should write a note, just write a note. The little red dot here was me just going around class while they were filling this in, just checking that, they were getting on okay with it, and they were on the right tracks. So yeah, that's it. I think that's it. And then, in terms of assessment, you hope between, good quality teaching, good quality feedback, and some class tests, that they build up their competency. And so one of the things that we did as part of the program was to design a set of basically class tests for end of term. So there's a whole set of these. I mean, it's just, they're all different ones there, and you can see that they're all of a similar style to the skills book, because of course they're all pulled from the skills book. So they're also class tests that reinforce learning. Now, ideally, what would be great in a school would be if in your department everybody had the same test, and because it shows some consistency of approach across your department. If that's something you wanted to do, there's a whole set there that you can use. But they're designed along the lines of the skills book, which is designed along the lines of the actual State Examination Commission exams, right? And I think I have, yeah. So this is from last year's. So this was last year's paper had this map of the plates, and you had to identify a plate, and you had to say whether it's colliding or separating. That's exactly what they had to do in the skills book when they were doing it. So, and we'll be revising that for 3rd year. So if this comes up again, some shape or form, they'll have that. And again, it's 2 colliding, 2 separating, 2 conservative plate boundaries. And then they had to name the plates as well. So similar activities. This kind of thing, their geomorph is quite a big section in the specification. Excuse me. And typically, they like to put in a map and ask you to identify features. Okay, so between the skills book and the textbook, that's what happens. There's the map, there's the feature, just the waterfall, and of course they've got the explanation for the formation of the waterfall, which they fill in their skills book. And of course, that's the question that came up. Explain how the processes of river erosion or rivers or the process of glacial erosion help shape this landscape. And so hopefully they've had a bit of experience with that in the classroom. That takes me to this, and I think this might actually be my last point. So I went through. We're still kind of fairly early days with the. Sorry, let's go back there. We're still fairly early days with the junior cycle exam. So we had the sample paper, and we've had 3 years. And one of the things I noted last year was that they hadn't asked climates and the formation of a significant weather event. And lo and behold, 2024, those two pop up on the paper, right? So there'd been 1 year and then a gap, and then so it might not come up this year, significant weather event. So I'd be pushing that down my priority list of revision. Anything in yellow anything in yellow in this column, the 2024 column, that's probably where I'll focus some of my efforts, or I'll focus my efforts this year. 1.10, that's the sort of synthesizing one that brings all the physical processes together. Now that river question is a bit like that, but basically this investigate is really a kind of a CBA2 sort of LO. It wasn't designed that way, but investigate is really the kind of action verb where students are getting stuck into something themselves. So it's more like a CVA LO. So that might explain why they haven't really asked a question on that at all. But just another one there. So for 4C, so this was natural resources. Again, I'd be kind of thinking there might not be a question on that this year, but I wouldn't ignore it completely. It's just I'd shove it down my list of priorities in favor of secondary economic activities, which they didn't ask last year. And that's kind of topical at the moment as well. So I'm kind of keeping an eye on this. I think it's kind of useful. I don't know that there's anything that you can point to and say it's a clear trend. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that if there's a topic that they haven't asked in at least 1 year, but possibly 2, it'd be really worth doing that topic. And that might help your students. There's one last thing. I didn't put together a slide on this, but I think it's worth kind of mentioning. One of the difficulties with the paper is the timing and how students can get through it within the time, particularly A, weaker students, and B, stronger students. Those two tend to spend a little bit longer than, say, students who are in the middle. And so what I've been saying to my students, and I need to talk to them a bit more about the mocks. What I said to them was, questions like this one here, the North American plate, the Eurasian plate, they're ones that they can do quite quickly, right? But there's a couple of questions where there might be a calculation, or there might be a drawing, or they might have to write a paragraph. And what I've said to them is skip, if you can, skip over those ones. Do all these quick, short questions first, and then go back and have a look at the more in-depth questions, the ones that are more likely to suck the time away from you, and see how that works. So I've yet to have a more detailed conversation with them about their mocks and whether that approach worked. I had some weaker students who didn't finish the paper. I had a couple of stronger students who didn't finish, and then basically a big chunk of students in the middle who did. And I just need to catch up with their experience. I'd love to know what your experience was of that, and whether you have a technique. If we had the marks that were going for each question, that would help. But we've nothing to go on. So there is that element of they just have to go like the clappers through the paper and see how well they do. And the problem with that is if they're going too fast, they might misread a question. But every little thing that helps prep them, like, and even in terms of priority revision, that might be just something that makes a difference for some of them, especially given the way that the marks are kind of fallen between, large numbers of students in the middle getting merits, and it seems to be so hard for anybody to get a distinction. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have. I'd love to take any questions that you might have, Connor, if you were there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a reminder to everybody out there, if you'd like to post a question, don't be shy, just pop it into the chat there. But Peter, thanks very much for that. It's funny, looking through a lot of those screenshots reminded me again of how well the real world geography teaching package supports planning. And also the structure of the chapters, how every chapter itself has its own set of learning goals or learning intentions, and then the content, the homework, the practice questions, the skills book that you mentioned, and even the rubrics for assessment that are in that all go back to the learning outcomes and the learning intentions that you set out from the off. So truly, it's a really great teaching package. So if anyone has any questions about that actually, or would like to learn more about the components of real world geography, like the planning or the textbook or the skills book, you can do that by going on to folens.ie. And if you search for real world geography, you can get an explainer of the program, and there's a whole bunch of resources that are up there that you can sample and take a look at. Um, just to the next slide, Peter, if you don't mind clicking forward, just to also let people know that if you want to connect with your local Folens rep, if you don't know who they are, you can find out who they are by going onto folens.ie and entering your school name or roll number if you know it, and that'll throw back who the name and contact details of your rep are, if you want to contact them and ask them any questions with respect to the real world geography teaching package. So yeah, Monica's just asking if we can share the slides. Absolutely, we will. We'll share those. I think they're scheduled to go out tomorrow to anybody registered, so we'll get those out to you. And I'll just keep an eye on the chat there. But I know, Peter, just one thing that was a challenge, or is a constant challenge, I guess, in publishing for a subject like geography at a common level for junior cycle, is the whole area of the mixed ability classroom and catering. You mentioned there, even in the exam, you've got a whole range of ability, I suppose, in your classroom, and you've got to try to cater for that and different abilities. How do you approach that for geography? Do you have any tips or suggestions for teachers on strategies for differentiation and where that might be even in real world geography itself?
Yeah, actually, do you know what? It's very difficult because when you have a large class, um, like it's really I worked it out one day that I think I've about 250 students a year, and I think my one-to-one time for every student works out about 5 minutes a year. So so it's very difficult really to get around them all and to cater to their particular needs. Um, in the teacher's guide, there's a section on differentiation, which has examples of activities that teachers can use if they want to extend students' learning in a particular area. I've one or two students in second year now. Like I've one student in second year. I mean, she could nearly start leaving cert in the morning. Like she's that good. And I've said to her, that she can work ahead. She doesn't need to wait for us in class. Um, and I'd have certain activities that just extend her learning. It's difficult because you you have to achieve that everybody has to learn exactly the same curriculum. So you it's difficult to go ahead when you know that there's somebody hasn't quite achieved say the minimum in the chapter on volcanoes or the minimum in the one on earthquakes. So you absolutely have to make sure that everybody achieves each learning outcome, and that can take up your time. So I think those differentiation exercises that are in the teacher's guide would be very useful. There's several ideas for helping teachers just encourage students to learn a little bit more. And I think then when it comes to things like CBAs, that's a great opportunity for students who are more able to do more. Although in my experience, they tend not to. Um, but equally, what you could do is, and it really depends on how your class is set up, the kind of classroom culture you have, is it may not be necessary for all of your students to do exactly the same type of learning or to follow the same approach to learning when it comes to particular topics. So you might have a weaker student that you really need to sit down with and go, okay, this is the volcano, this is the vent, this is the crater. But you might have another student that you're able to say, look, I'm going to be doing this bit with the class, but here I want you to do this instead. I want you um, to read that section in the book. I want you to try that CBA, warm up yourself. I want you to find out what linkages you can make between, say, the chapter on volcanoes and the one on farming. Is there something there that you can connect? So it is something that takes a bit of time, and you have to really kind of sit down, and you have to know the student as well. Like I've got one student at the moment who's comfortable. He he would be well capable of getting a distinction, but he's kind of comfortable drifting at merit level, and he just needs a little bit of extra work every now and again, and go, here, do that, do that. I have to feed him more stuff, just to keep him going, and he hates it. But look, too bad, because I think it's important to stretch students. So yeah, I think my starting point would be the teacher's guide, because that has loads of differentiation exercises in there that teachers could use.
Good.
Sorry, I rambled on a bit there.
No, that's okay. Just I'm conscious of time now, but this is maybe putting you on the spot, Peter. But a query in asking, will there be, or are there plans for a geography teachers conference this year?
So our last conference was a while ago. We had trouble trying to get a venue. We have a Leaving Cert consultation in person coming up on the 22nd of March. And that's free to attend. There's 100 places. There's plenty of places left at the moment. But that, I would sign up for that. That'll be a great opportunity to engage with the new Leaving Cert specification. And then once that's out of our hair, we'll be organising a conference for the end of September then. And obviously that's going to be particularly important with the new specification and so on. So 22nd of March is in fact 22nd of March is our first. No, sorry, it's our second in-person thing since COVID. I've done quite a bit of stuff online for education centres, so they're not directly AGTI stuff, but we'll be ramping that up with the new specification coming on stream. So, but yeah.
And Peter, just a couple of questions asking, how do you register for the conference itself? The one, the consultation meeting conference that's happening soon.
So the one on the 22nd of March, there's a link on the Facebook page. There's a link on the AGTI Twitter page or X page. I could send that to you if you wanted to send it out to people to register for that. But yeah, it's on. The link is on. The link is pinned to our Twitter profile, so for the AGTI, so you can't miss it. And it's at the AGTI.
Okay.
It's there.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah.
A question, just we might get to this last one as it's relating to junior cert. Just a question, is the paper itself too long, the junior cycle? Paper itself.
I don't know is the real answer. I do think that I think there's two problems with it. The first one is the most obvious one. There's no marks on it, and because there's no marks, we can't really tell our students rather how to manage their time in the paper, right? So in the absence of marks, then it looks like the test is partly a test of whether you can complete the paper. And I think that's, I can't agree with that kind of approach, because it should be, you want to test students' geographical knowledge rather than their clerical skills, and certainly there's issues for students who have scribes or who are typing. So it probably is a bit long, but if we had the marks, then students would know how much they have to write for each answer, because like a sentence might be a valid point and there's 2 marks for a valid point depending. So it's yeah. Now to be fair to the SEC, they've been really great at accepting feedback from us when we get that feedback from teachers. So every year the AGTI holds a sort of a post-exam analysis of the paper in June. We usually get a few people online, but the more we get, the merrier. And we feed that back to the SEC. And like I say, to be fair to them, they're within the context of the integrity of the exam. They're very good at going, thank you for your feedback, and we do see improvements. But it's kind of difficult because there has to be some kind of equality across all the exam papers, and it's hard to change one without changing another. So yeah, it's
Peter, just a couple of follow-up questions on that conference on the 22nd, about there's some teachers who are not on X/Twitter. And I've just gone onto the AGTI website and I see that there's a secretary.agti@gmail.com. If they were to email that, would you be able to respond to them with the link or provide
yeah,
them the information?
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Or they
I'm just
could
going to
email
pop that in
me.
there for anyone who's asking. If you just want to use that and maybe use that email address, it's probably it's easier just to contact Peter maybe
Yeah,
directly
an
through an
email, yeah.
email and he can share that info with you. Just Katie's just asked about the units of learning or the planning that you've shown. Obviously, I think there's one sample that you showed in the slide.
Yeah.
And we're asking where you can find all the units of learning, or is it just the one in the teacher's guide? Like, where is that
No,
resource available?
no, there's now the there all of there's so the those that's an Excel file that is, it's at the whole kit and caboodle. And the reps have it. So it's there for anybody adopting the package. And there's a unit for that. There's 12 units in total that covers the entire junior cycle specification. Like you could nearly go in and just teach from that. No, the whole thing is there, and like I say, the reps have access to it. And in fact, the teacher's guide complements that. So you could look at the unit of learning and go, right, okay, I have that now. What do I do? Okay, here's my teacher's guide. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Great. Now I've got my PowerPoints. I have my digital resources. I have my skills book. And the feedback sort of mechanism is built into that. It's just a case of checking it. And I would take those in. Like I take them at the end of each topic, so the feedback thing is built in, and then I have the class test. Like it's all there.
Okay, I'm just going to post in the link to find your rep. If you are using real world geography and you're not sure where to find that, you can contact them and they can supply that with you. That
Sorry,
again,
Conor,
another question.
I was just going to say, Conor, I used to take home copybooks, and that thing, 12 o'clock at night when you put the kids to bed, marking copybooks. I thought, no, that I can't be doing that anymore. So I found a different system, which was we do really good like all the writing that my students do, we do in class, and we assess that in class, and we give feedback on that in class, and then I check it once in a while. So I don't take home junior cycle copybooks to correct anymore, and I've got my evenings back, which is nice.
And one more question about the conference. Where will it be taking place?
The March consultation on the Leaving Cert will be in the port. It's in the Maldron Hotel at Junction 17 in Portlaoise. So Maldron Hotel, Portlaoise, Junction 17. On I think it's the M4. Is that right? The M7. And so we chose Portlaoise because it's should be accessible from Cork and Limerick and Galway and so on. Yeah, so it's in Portlaoise. And the one in September, we're looking at Athlone. We've yet to really just confirm that and tie it down. It's a bit away because it's the end of September. So,
well, there seems to be certainly a bit of interest about the consultation meeting, and I'm sure the conference as well. So, it'd be good to get that out, spread the good word once you know.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. We're just pushing close to 8 o'clock, so I think that's about as many questions as we can answer for now. So Peter, again, thank you very much
thank you very
for
much.
such an informative presentation, and of course a huge thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We know it's a very busy time of year in schools, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us this evening. So if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through your Fallon's rep. Probably is the best place to start. We're always happy to help. So Of what's left of it, I hope you have a lovely evening, and thanks again for being part of today's session. Take care.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.